Welcome, folks, to our second Young Voices live debate, doing this virtually on civil.com, streaming on civil.com, on X, on our Civil channel, and on YouTube. We are going to have an excellent debate today about a very pertinent topic on the U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiations that are taking place under the second Trump administration. As we wait for our two debaters to get ready and for our opening statements to start, let me tell you a little bit about myself and about Young Voices Debates and our partnership with Civil.com. Young Voices Debates is an initiative that I started, starting with a desire to bring conversations and topics that seemed like they were missing from the dinner table of discussion in American politics and discourse, and bring them to the fore for conversations with experts, as you will see in a couple of minutes, on topics that matter to Americans all around the nation. And we partner with civil.com, a streaming platform that specializes in encouraging exactly such debate and such discourse that is focused on the issues that matter to this country, but debates and conversations that happen in a harmonious and civil manner. So without further ado, let me start us off here and start adding to the stage our two debaters. Let me invite Dave and Behnam. Welcome both Dave and Behnam. Thank you again for agreeing to have this pertinent and pressing debate on an issue that matters to Americans across the nation. Um, as we do the introductions for Behnam and for Dave, I would invite everyone who is watching this debate right now, live on X, on YouTube, and on civil.com, to take out their phones, to take a screenshot of this QR code, and vote on the following debate resolution. If the Trump administration fails to achieve complete Iranian denuclearization, the United States government should pursue all necessary measures to effect regime change in Iran. So this is the debate that we are the debate resolution we are going to be discussing. And as I introduce the two debaters, let me just introduce the process moving forward. An Oxford-style debate. We will start with a vote, as you are doing right now. You're scanning the QR code and giving us your opinion, where you stand on this matter, whether you agree, you disagree, or are uncertain about your position on this specific topic. And then we'll have 10 minutes of opening statements from both Behnam and Dave. After that, we have 5 minutes of rebuttal from both debaters, and then we have 40 minutes of questions and answers. And finally, once the questions and answers segment is concluded, we will have 5-minute closing statements from both debaters. And then once that is done, we will do another round of voting, and we will see who is able to sway more votes to their side. So while I introduce the debaters, please make sure you are taking a screenshot of this QR code, or if you're watching on your TV or on your laptop, take your phone and make your voice heard for this debate. Make sure you do that now. Behnam Ben Taleblu is the Senior Director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Iran program, where he oversees the breadth and depth of the FDD's work on Iran, in addition to serving as a Senior Fellow specializing in Iranian security and political issues. Dave DeCamp is the news editor at antiwar.com, and he is the host of the Antiwar News with Dave DeCamp daily podcast. And in 2024, he won Journalism Award, the Pierre Sprey Journalism Award. He came in second place. Dave does a daily 30-minute news show that focuses on geopolitics and other topics, and he just reached 10,000 YouTube subscribers. We have an excellent choice of debaters who are topic experts from Behnam and Dave. This issue here is their bread and butter. So we hope to bring to you a very enlightening and informing debate. So without further ado, now we assume most people have voted. Behnam, we would like to introduce you to the stage so you can start with your 10-minute opening statement. Please take it away, Behnam.
Greetings, listeners. First, allow me to thank both Young Voices and Civil for hosting this timely debate on U.S.-Iran policy. Currently, we are between rounds 3 and 4 of direct or indirect, depending on who you believe, US-Iran nuclear talks, all within the first 100 days of the second Trump administration. I want to begin by thanking Hekmat for helping with organization and logistics for today's debate, as well as to Dan for sharing the virtual stage with me this evening, as well as to all of you for tuning in virtually this evening. Let me begin by saying whatever side of the motion you are on, or whatever side prevails tonight, I think I can speak for both Dave and I when I say that a more informed electorate, one that can partake in the debate about the contours of what is and isn't in the national interest and the necessary policies to defend it, is better for all of us. That's a good thing, and I mean it. This evening, I'm defending the proposition that, quote, should the Trump administration fail to achieve complete Iranian denuclearization, the US government should pursue all necessary measures to effect regime change in Iran. Yes, that's correct. You heard the dreaded RC word, regime change, but not as you might think. Before the proposition can be argued and supported this evening, I believe definitions are in order. Due to some of our priors, some of us may not share the same definitions of words or phrases, and that's okay, but we should at least be consistent and forthright with how we see them. Complete Iranian denuclearization is, at least to me, a colloquialism for dismantlement of Iran's atomic infrastructure. There are various technical contours for this that I would be happy to unpack in the Q&A. Second, all necessary means are tools of national power, be they diplomatic, informational, economic, and military. They are not an endorsement of one tool over the other. Democracy is not imposed, at least in my view, at the barrel of a rifle. But support for democratic movements, such as those that exist in Iran, should benefit from US support. And three, effect regime change means take the steps using the powers and authorities of the US government to change the political order in Tehran and relegate the Islamic Republic to the ash heap of history. For me, that means formulating US policy that finally works with, rather than against, large swaths of protesting Iranians who have been expressing their frustration at the clerical regime in various rounds of nationwide uprisings, but particularly since December 2017 to the spring of 2023. Accordingly, that also means not engaging in policies that extend the shelf life of the Islamic Republic and provides it with more resources to underwrite domestic suppression and foreign aggression. With these definitions out of the way, let me help explain my support for the first, dare I say, more critical element of the motion, which is complete Iranian denuclearization. President Trump has been serious about seeking a diplomatic resolution to the Iranian nuclear crisis, and good for him. Years ago, he touted in reference to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal known as the JCPOA that, quote, I buy bad deals and make them good deals. When inaugurated in 2017, Trump spent a year and a half trying to negotiate with Europe to fix the flaws of the JCPOA. That process failed. In May 2018, he left the deal saying it was inconsistent with US national security interests. Since then, and well into his second term, he has relied on a combination of political tough talk, major economic sanctions, and military deterrence, all under the umbrella of a policy called maximum pressure to get Iran to come to the table and renegotiate. Tehran rejected all of Trump's offers throughout Term 1, calling him unworthy of negotiating with at all. Minor point here, but in between Term 1 and 2, as Trump campaigned again for the presidency, the regime had actually plotted to kill him. Accordingly, when faced with Trump back in the White House in Term 2, Iran's leaders did a 180. With its economy under greater pressure, social unrest significantly expanding, missile production and long-range strategic air defenses crippled due to two historic Israeli direct retaliations against Iranian territory, with the long arm of Iran-backed terror in Gaza, Hamas, and in Lebanon, Hezbollah, neutered by Israel, the collapse of its sole state ally in the Middle East, the Assad regime in Syria, gone, and the Houthis in Yemen more recently getting preemptively pounded by B-2s, the Islamic Republic has indeed finally decided to talk. Yet there is no preemptive or premature victory lap to be taken. In these talks, Washington cannot afford to settle for another limited deal like the JCPOA that allows Iran to enrich uranium domestically and just kicks the can down the road and legitimizes the regime's nuclear expansion. Nor can it afford to ignore what the US intelligence community has called the most likely delivery vehicle for a nuclear weapon, ballistic missiles, when Iran has been home to the largest ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East for over 2 decades and is the only country in history without first having developed nuclear weapons to have developed a 2,000-kilometer ballistic missile. And last year, not once, not twice, but thrice, the Islamic Republic of Iran a admittedly non-nuclear armed state fired ballistic missiles directly and overtly at the territory of two nuclear armed states, once Pakistan, January of last year, and twice Israel, April and October of last year. As Trump rightly complained in 2018, what kind of deal is it if you're allowed to test missiles all over the place? I'm saying all of this today because the superpower does not get to act, the supplicant does not get to act like the superpower. Losers don't get to set the table for the winners. Dismantling Iran's nuclear infrastructure should be the only diplomatic aim in mind if indeed the president is intent on negotiating. But the president should not be boxed in. There are other options. This brings me to my support for the second part of the motion, which has to do with regime change. No policy of max pressure from the top alone will be successful if it is not paired with a policy of maximum support to the Iranian people that can allow for a pincer to be put on the regime from the bottom as such. The nuclear threat from the Islamic Republic is only part of the larger problem we face with Tehran today. The larger challenge the US faces has to do with the nature of the regime itself. Today, the Islamic Republic is an Islamist authoritarian regime ruling over a secular nationalist population. It is a revolutionary government ruling over a post-revolutionary society. These two things don't mix. Iranians have been bravely protesting against this regime in its entirety since 2017, eschewing the ballot box and taking every opportunity to protest. Developing a policy that empowers them and levels the playing field between state and society is not at all like America's misadventures in the Middle East, particularly after 9/11. The Iranian population has been seeking representative government for over a century, it would be important to know, and the constitutional revolution of 1905-1906 is the oldest in the Islamic world. Supporting regime change in Iran isn't some chauvinistic, neo-Orientalist, Western imperialist thing. It's one of the few times in the Middle East that strategy and values actually does come together. Lest we forget, this is a regime that thought it would be safer, better off, if it assassinated a major candidate for the highest political office in the United States. This is a regime that has taken the risk with respect to ballistic missiles I previously outlined without first having developed a nuclear weapon. Imagine if it did. This is a regime that has been calling America the Great Satan since 1979 and birthed its animosity and enmity with Washington through an act of international hostage-taking, an act that it continues with various other Western capital countries to this day. Every single threat that we have let fester from this regime has continued to get worse, not better, over time. And look at those threats. Drones, ballistic missiles, threats to energy security, nuclear program. Do you know when those threats came from? Those were threats with their origins in the 1980-1988 Iran-Iraq War, the first decade of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Whether you have counterproliferation at the top of your foreign policy priorities, things like the Saudi model now, the Saudis seeking enrichment because in the past the US had granted enrichment to the Iranians, or whether you have great power competition at the top of your mind now because you see the connection between Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, it is critical to get Iran right. No doubt, no US president has been campaigning on, let alone winning votes for, doing more in the Middle East, not less. But the way to do less in the Middle East and not more is actually to focus on the arsonist rather than the multiple fires established by or fanned by the arsonist in the Middle East. That's actually dealing with the Islamic Republic of Iran. A vigorous defense of the US national interest is now needed more than ever, given these rising other powers that threaten Washington's interests around the globe. There is no straight line, I can tell you, from appeasing the Ayatollahs and being able to counter the Chinese Communist Party. In the Middle East, the ordering principle to get out and focus on those broader threats actually has to begin with preventing the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism from attaining the world's most dangerous weapons. And by understanding that that technical challenge is nested into a larger political challenge, can we begin to more holistically address it? Thank you for your time, attention, and hopefully your votes.
Thank you very much for your opening statement, Behnam. Dave, go ahead and start yours. I will mute you to make sure. All right, go ahead, Dave. You have 10 minutes.
All right. Well, first, I want to thank you, Hekmat, for setting this up, and Behnam for being my opponent here, and for Civil and Young Voices, and everyone that's tuning in. So, to get started here, when I hear regime change, I think of military action. And we have seen a lot of hawks in the U.S., Iran hawks, have this attitude that the U.S. and Israel could potentially bomb Iranian nuclear facilities, and that'll be that. That'll be the denuclearization. So a lot of my argument is focused on that. And as we're discussing this today in 2025, it's more than almost 24 years since 9/11, 22 years since the invasion of Iraq, and the American people are still living with the consequences of these disastrous wars in the Middle East, which continue to this day. The U.S. is still waging war across the region. And we've seen the lies and the promises of quick and easy wars and liberations that ended up costing millions of lives and trillions of dollars. And we've seen Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, endless interventions that have left the countries in ruins and made Americans no safer. And the American public knows this, and they have no appetite for another major war in the Middle East. To look at the resolution that we're debating tonight, if the Trump administration fails to achieve complete Iranian denuclearization, the U.S. government should pursue all necessary measures to effect regime change in Iran. Not only do I believe the U.S. should not pursue regime change if it fails to denuclearize Iran, I do not think the U.S. should be even attempting to denuclearize Iran, because Iran has the right to a civilian nuclear program, and demanding its elimination will essentially ensure that diplomacy fails. This is not an issue that Iran is willing to compromise on, especially a country that has to deal with all these economic sanctions. They want as much energy independence as they can have. And another reason why I do not think the U.S. should pursue Iranian denuclearization is the fact that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. And according to U.S. intelligence community's 2025 threat assessment, there's no evidence they're trying to build a nuclear weapon. There's no evidence the Ayatollah has reversed his fatwa on the development of weapons of mass destruction. And Iran's nuclear program remains a civilian nuclear program. And this has been the consensus of the U.S. intelligence community since the early 2000s. So what we have seen is that Iran has increased its nuclear activity in recent years and is clearly using its nuclear program and enrichment levels and the threat of a nuclear weapon as leverage. But history has shown us that pressure, sabotage, and sanctions have only led to an increase in those activities that the hawks now point at as evidence that Iran is racing toward a bomb. If we just look at recent history, back in 2020, Israel assassinated Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, an Iranian nuclear scientist. In response to that, Iran's parliament voted to increase uranium enrichment to the 20% level. And then in 2021, Israel carried out another sabotage attack inside Iran, detonating an explosive inside the Natanz nuclear facility. And it was in response to that we started seeing this uranium enrichment at the 60% level, which is still below, they still haven't attempted the 90% needed for weapons grade. But the point here is that the acts of sabotage, the aggression from Israel, pushed Iran closer to weapons grade capability. And now we're facing another critical risk here, is that military action against Iran, trying to bomb their nuclear facilities out of existence, is the one thing that could actually push Iran to pursue nuclear weapons. Recently, a senior advisor to the Ayatollah stated that if Iran is attacked by the U.S. or its allies, Iran could reconsider its nuclear posture. And in other words, if we launch an attack on Iran under this false pretext of stopping a nuclear weapons program, it could have the opposite effect of actually ensuring that they pursue nuclear weapons. And in contrast, diplomacy has succeeded where pressure has failed. Under the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, Iran agreed to limit its uranium enrichment to just 3.67%, far below the weapons grade levels, in exchange for sanctions relief. The IAEA repeatedly verified that Iran was complying with the deal until the U.S. unilaterally withdrew from it in 2018. And a return to a JCPOA-style deal, or something maybe a little different so Trump can save some political face here, because this is he really campaigned against the JCPOA, especially in 2016. But a return to a deal like that would be a win-win for the U.S. and Iran. It would get verifiable limits on Iran's nuclear program, make it subject to the most stringent nuclear inspections in the world. And Iran would receive, the people of Iran would receive much needed sanctions relief. And the alternative, military action, would be absolutely catastrophic. Iran is as I mentioned, has a population of over 90 million, has a professional military, sophisticated missile capabilities, as Behnam was discussing, and its ballistic missiles can reach U.S. bases across the Middle East. So this idea that the U.S. can launch some limited attack and it wouldn't create a major war is not true. If Iran retaliates, which they would have to retaliate if the U.S. dropped 30,000-pound bunker-busting bombs on its nuclear facilities, they could hit American bases hard. There could be hundreds, if not thousands, of American casualties. And then where do we go from there? And so if regime change is the goal, a few airstrikes, a few bombings is not going to achieve it. It would either require a full-scale invasion or years of proxy warfare and bloodshed. And we have to ask, who would replace the current government? Would we fly in the son of the Shah, or would we install the MEK, which is a group that's reviled by most Iranians and was once considered a terrorist organization by the U.S.? And the strategy of sanctions and supporting civil groups on the ground. You just look at the history, that hasn't worked, of U.S. sanctions campaigns. So there's no credible alternative to replace the Islamic government. And trying to engineer a new government would almost certainly plunge Iran into chaos if the U.S. really tries to do this. And moreover, there is just no political will among the American people for a full-scale invasion. And the U.S. military would not be willing to do that either. So, some examples here of where regime change has led. I'm sure most people are very aware of all of these failures. In Afghanistan, the U.S. replaced the Taliban with the Taliban. In Iraq, the removal of Saddam Hussein led to the rise of ISIS and increased in Iranian influence in the country, which was a pretty easy thing to predict. In Libya, regime change turned the country into a failed state plagued by extremism and human trafficking. In Syria, U.S. efforts to weaken Assad empowered jihadist groups linked to al-Qaeda, who eventually took over the country. And regime change, it just doesn't bring stability. You're looking at the history of U.S. regime change efforts in this region. It brings chaos. And the other question is, why do we need to be so hostile toward Iran? Iran does not pose a threat to the United States. It has never attacked American soil and does not have weapons capable of doing so. The reality is that U.S. hostility toward Iran is driven by the interest of Israel, which views Iran as its main adversary in the region. We know now that Israel is pushing for a joint U.S.-Israel attack on Iran, where the U.S. would do most of the heavy lifting. And the U.S. has built up its military forces in the region, including by placing additional air defense capabilities in Israel. This is absolutely contrary to the America First foreign policy that Trump's base wants to see. And always missing from this conversation is the fact that Israel has a secret nuclear weapons program. Israel, that's not subject to any IAEA inspections, that the U.S. does not even officially recognize exists. So it's just always missing from the conversation. And then we will hear claims tonight about these alleged Iranian assassination plots against Trump, which I think, if you look at the specific instances, the evidence looks pretty shaky that Iran was really trying to kill Trump. There was 2 assassination attempts against him, and neither was traced to Iran. And Trump does not seem to be acting like someone who thinks Iran is trying to kill him. And as we're discussing this issue, we're living through yet another disastrous U.S. intervention in the Middle East. The U.S. bombing campaign against the Houthis in Yemen, constant U.S. airstrikes for over a month have killed many civilians and have completely failed to deter the Houthis, who are known for their resilience. There is also a simple diplomatic solution to the situation in Yemen, which is a ceasefire in Gaza. Attempting a regime change in Iran will be much more difficult than the U.S. is currently trying to do in Yemen. And the choice before us is clear. The U.S. can pursue diplomacy, reach an agreement that limits nuclear risks and reduces the chances of another catastrophic war. Or it can pursue escalation, sanctions, sabotage, bombings, and another endless conflict that will cost countless lives and leave the world even less secure. The American people do not want another Iraq or Afghanistan. And we cannot bomb our way to peace, and we cannot sanction our way to democracy. If we care about people's lives, global stability, and basic morality, then we must reject the path of regime change in Iran. The path forward is diplomacy and peace. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Dave, for your 10-minute opening statement. At this point, Behnam, take it away. You have 5 minutes for your rebuttal.
Pardon?
Behnam, you have 5 minutes for your rebuttal now. Please take it away.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dave. I actually did fear very much that this would happen, which is why a little bit of behind the scenes right now for you, ladies and gentlemen. I saw the initial flyer for our lovely debate this evening, and it had said initially in question mark, war with Iran, or in a questioning tone, war with Iran. I am not in the business of, nor do I promote, nor do I think right now war with Iran is a wise thing. In fact, if we had to take a screenshot of something that Dave rightly flagged, which was the Israeli desire to have President Trump, I think by May or mid-May or the end of May, based on that New York Times report, engage in preemptive military strikes against the Islamic Republic's nuclear facilities. I think the president was right to wave it off then. I think certainly if you are in the business of either promoting regime change or supporting, empowering the Iranian people, as I am talking about today, by marrying maximum pressure with maximum support, that would be an impediment. Particularly would be an impediment for a president who is not looking to get into another Middle Eastern war. And the reason I had flagged the poster for Hekmat and required or kindly requested that it be changed to the poster that you all saw today when you logged in and when you voted is because I don't think a war is helpful. That's why I spent quite a bit of time at the front end of my commentary today to make sure that there is nothing that ought to be construed that there is a way to bomb your way to democracy. I think I had the line in there that it does not come at the barrel of a rifle. So there we actually agree. It would be a shame to circumscribe a really important debate about U.S. interests, which I think can be had here tonight in the Middle East when it comes to other areas, about the judiciousness when it comes to the use of force, to trying to have me see this as Behnam supporting militarized action against the Islamic Republic of Iran for the purpose of democracy. I explicitly said, and I want to re-up that, the Iraq model, the Afghanistan model, the bring someone who has no social base model, the use of military force to fly someone in is, I would say, totally inconsistent, not only with what the American people want and the American people have been consistently voting for, but is also inconsistent with that critical thing that I think allows us to marry strategy and values in an otherwise very tough area in the world, to marry our strategy and marry our values, which is the way the Iranian people have been protesting. Look, no doubt the Iranian people do not want a war that has looked like Iraq or Afghanistan on their border either. And I, for one, as a first-generation American of Iranian ancestry, don't believe the U.S. should be in the business of charity when it comes to their foreign policy. I very much like that Henry Kissinger quote, "Foreign policy is not about missionary work," or "Foreign policy is not missionary work." This is not missionary activity. This is being able to walk and chew gum at the same time and realize that one of the things that we do suffer from is the way that the regime in Tehran defines its interests, not national interests, but regime interests, which is why as the population moved away from reform, that you saw in 1999, reform-minded protests, 2009, reform-minded protests. From 2009 onward, you had about a decade of labor strikes, the overpromise and the underdelivery of that nuclear deal that you mentioned, Dave, the failure of reform, that basically brought about slogans like "Not Gaza, not Lebanon, my life for Iran." Believe it or not, that country is going through an Iran-first moment as well, in terms of a population that is nationalist, that wants a much more limited foreign policy. There is a way to actually do that at a cost rate that is significantly cheaper than an F-35. And I will be the first to say it is not easy, it is not fast, but it is much more judicious than rushing to a needless conflict, and it is much more judicious than putting time on the clock when it comes to paying the Ayatollahs to delay, to kick the can down the road, for them to create more havoc that'll create more instances from people like, with immense respect, Dave's worldview, or from people with the beyond my right worldview, to have to debate about should there be another military conflict in the Middle East or not when it comes to another proxy that the Islamic Republic would have created, like the Badr Corps in Iraq or Hezbollah in Lebanon, or another proxy that the Islamic Republic would be able to co-opt in a pre-existing war zone, like the Houthis in Yemen or Hamas in Gaza. So I think at the core of it, dare I say, there may be more interest, there may be more overlap than meets the eye because of me wanting to push back away from the table. I think very clearly, ladies and gentlemen, you saw my more circumscribed approach to what way you can affect and ought to affect regime change in Iran. And simply bombing your way to it, in my view, is not it. That doesn't mean that I don't think a conflict is coming, because the Islamic Republic of Iran has been putting its money where its mouth is when it says death to America. Now, it's been putting its money where its mouth is with respect to another country as well when it says death to Israel. Dave rightly mentioned Israel's nuclear program. There's a great book on that. I think Avner Cohen called Israel and the Bomb, or Israel's Atomic Program. I forget the name, but no doubt Israel has an atomic enterprise. No doubt they have atomic weapons. That is not motivating Iran's nuclear quest. Iran just pushing away from the table, looking at their country across two regimes, roughly 70 years, has been interested in developing civil nuclear capability and using that civil nuclear capability as a hedge to potentially get a nuclear weapon. They have not been impacted that much, actually, by the Israelis. The Iranians resurrected the late Shah's nuclear program, which, according to a special intelligence estimate from 1974, actually had status considerations. And one of the foreign countries impacting the regime's status considerations was India's nuclear efforts at that point in the Cold War. So we need to keep our eyes on the prize here. We need to keep the definition of the national interest narrow. No one is talking about a war. We are talking about being able to marry our strategy and our values, walk and chew gum at the same time.
Thank you, Behnam. Dave, you have 5-minute rebuttal plus a little bit more because
sorry about that.
No worries. Behnam went slightly over.
Okay.
Go ahead, take it away, Dave.
Yeah, I definitely want to. When we get to the questions, I want to ask you more about your methods for regime change. But to respond to some of the things you said in the opening, sanctions, and the U.S. has a long history of trying to use sanctions essentially for regime change. The idea is you sanction a country, you wreck the economy, you get the people to rise up. But if you look at the history, I mean, you look at Cuba, a country that's been under a decades-long U.S. embargo. The same government is still there. And only the people have suffered. Obviously, North Korea has been under, global sanctions for decades and decades. And we see this time and time again with Russia. I mean, the U.S., not that they were trying to affect regime change in Russia, but sanctions haven't achieved any sort of goals for the U.S. in Ukraine. Russia was prepared for it. So when it comes to this idea that we can just sanction Iran and then support democracy protesters on the ground, I just don't think that's really a realistic way to affect regime change. And I also don't think it's anything that the U.S. should be involved in. I don't think we should interfere with the internal situation in Iran at all. One reason why is because the Islamic government, it's a big part of their identity, this revolutionary identity that they have when they chant death to America. And with these sanctions that the U.S. puts on them, they can always point to those as the reason for all the economic and hardships that people are facing. They can point to the opposition and say, oh, they're all foreign funded. I think it's a detriment to the people who want more freedom in Iran for us to be putting our noses in it. I mean, just where we are as a country, our history over the past few decades, like we just really have no business. And of course, the whole reason why this is part of their identity is because the U.S., the CIA put the Shah in power in the 1950s. And again, this is just all part of the regime's identity. I don't really like to use the word regime. I think government is a bad enough word. But so I really think that it's just, it wouldn't get us anywhere. It would have the opposite effect. And only the Iranian people would suffer. We see the resolution. It says, what does it say exactly? Should pursue all necessary measures to effect regime change in Iran. I mean, that implies military action because sanctions, it's just not going to work from my view. And I do think, we're living another big factor here. We're living in kind of an interesting moment when you have this, you just had the Saudi defense minister go over to Iran. The big cause of destabilization in the region right now is not because of Hezbollah. It's because, or the Shiites in Iraq, it's because of what Israel's doing in Gaza to the Palestinians. There's just mass slaughter that's happening. And, that's the cause of the Houthi attacks and the war that happened in Lebanon, starting in 2023. So for the U.S., I mean, we have to just exit the region and pursue diplomacy instead of sanctions and bombing. It's just not going to work. Get a ceasefire in Gaza, get a real deal there, and open up with Iran. Let's start doing business. We've seen Iranian officials say that they're, basically kind of speaking Trump's language, that American companies can make trillions investing, not trillions, can make billions investing in Iran. And I think it would be good for both of our countries to have open exchange, for the Iranian and American people to get to know each other. So I think that's diplomacy is the path forward, not regime change at all.
All right. Thank you both for your opening statements and your rebuttals. At this point, we will start with our Q&A segment, where we would start discussing some of the topics raised in this debate. And let me open it up by opening the digital theater here for Behnam and Dave to ask each other questions on any issues that you thought needed to be delved into further. So take it away, Behnam or Dave.
Sure. Just a question. How, is it 2 and 2 or is it 1 and 1? How many questions do we ask each other?
It's all according to timing. So go ahead and ask, and maybe we'll fit in a couple of questions more.
Okay.
And
sure.
sorry to interrupt, Behnam, but for all the 3,000 viewers online or more now, I haven't checked, who are watching the debate, please go ahead and ask your questions on YouTube, on civil.com, or on X. We would love it if you participate in this conversation as much as possible. Behnam and Dave, take it away. Ask each other a question.
Would you like to go ahead, sir? I have one, but...
No, you go ahead.
Okay, so it's just picking up on one thread that you mentioned about interference in another country's affairs. Why should the Islamic Republic of Iran be immune to interference in its affairs when you have US intel and the DOJ for the 2020 election saying the Iranians actually intervened in that election to try to spook voters to get them to go Democrat by emulating the Proud Boys? You had the former DNI under the Biden administration, Avril Haines, talking about Iran actually being able to fund not all, but some of the Hamas protesters in the US. You actually have had the Iranians, yes, try to use the Quds Force, which is the extraterritorial arm, the special operations arm of the IRGC, to try to kill the Saudi ambassador. You've had cases prosecuted in the Southern District of New York trying to go after an Iranian dissident who's thankfully now an American citizen on US soil. And you've had the plots against the president's life himself. Why should the Islamic Republic have a free hand on the American homeland against the US electoral system, and we have to sit back and, as the superpower, take it from the supplicant?
I mean, you could just use that exact argument in reverse from the Iranian perspective, because, as I mentioned, the history here is U.S. interference and intervention in Iran. And a lot of those things you mentioned, I mean, these claims that they tried to interfere in the election, I mean, I don't think there's really much to that, or that they were funding protests. I don't think there was ever any real evidence to show that. I think a lot of that is bogus.
So how come, may I ask, do you cite the U.S. intelligence community when it's conducive for you to cite it, when it says that they aren't taking the final step with respect to weaponization, but it's not convenient to take their claim here that Miss Avril Haines made back in 2024?
Well, I mean, because part of it is my own discernment of what is likely true and what is likely not true. And I mean, what was really like the evidence that she put out?
What feeds into your discernment? I'm quite curious.
I mean, I'm asking you, what is the real evidence here?
No, I'm asking you first. By what measure are you discerning?
I mean, from following these things closely and knowing what's true, what's not. We saw
closely.
We saw U.S. intelligence agencies for years claim that Russia installed the United States.
When it comes to intervention,
you asked me a question, I'd like to answer it.
I think Mr. Hekmat can moderate the debate himself if he wants to, but I think.
I mean, no, you asked me a question. I want to answer it.
I'm glad you finally want to answer on the fourth time. But go ahead. Don't get upset. Don't just.
Let's get a full response from Dave, and then we can.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just started responding, and you interrupted. So
I did interrupt, yes, but I thought it was a back and forth.
It is a back and forth, but let's.
It's annoying because this is all just for the past few years. We've seen the intelligence.
Sir, I just met you. There is no past few years. I just met you.
Yes,
I'm talking about the.
Okay, Dave, please go ahead with your response.
I'm talking about
what game for me, by the way.
All right.
I'm just speaking to the moderator.
Are you gonna let me talk?
Game for me.
Are you gonna let me talk?
I'm just speaking to the moderator. I'm just speaking to the moderator. Should I not?
I mean, can you hear me? I started responding to you.
Relax, sir. Relax.
Okay, everyone is relaxed. No worries. Let's focus on the topic at hand. Let's not talk to each other. Talk to me, and Dave, please take it away. Finish your response.
Yeah, what I was trying to say was that for the past few years, U.S. intelligence agencies have been trying to tell us that Russia installed President Trump, and those claims turn out to be completely bogus. So when we see these claims about Iranian interference in our election, I take them with a grain of salt. And when you actually look at the evidence, it's really not much compared to how the U.S. interferes in other countries. And you asked, why should Iran be immune to U.S. interference. Well, that's my view on foreign policy. I don't think we should be interfering in any other country's affairs. I think we should pursue a non-interventionist foreign policy, and we would have a lot less enemies in the world if that was the case.
Ben, one quick comment, and then I will ask Dave to ask you a question in return.
No comments. I'm
Okay.
good. Thank you for the answer.
All right, no worries. Dave,
Okay.
do you have a question for Behnam?
Yeah, my question is, so how do you do the regime change?
Well, first off, had I not seen what I've been seeing in Iran on the ground since 2017, I would not be in the business of even wanting to debate the proposition, because I think it would be unfair for American policy to have to force something that doesn't exist already. Had Iran not had the 100-year history of trying to seek representative government, I would not be trying to foist a model of government inconsistent with the group's values or worldview or belief set onto them. So had I not seen those two things, one, constitutional revolution to present, so the past 100-ish years of Iranian history, and two, under the Islamic Republic, the evolving pattern of protest away from reform. We remember the 1999 protests, Tehran University. We remember the 2009 protests triggered by the Green Movement, the stealing of the election, round two, Ahmadinejad versus Mousavi, former prime minister. Had that pattern continued, had Iran, despite being not a democracy, still had eerily high, I think more than even US electoral turnout, had the population chosen to still go through the ballot box, I would not give myself the right, as someone born and raised in the States, to try to put the cart before the horse to say that the government should be changed. You've seen the Iranian people consistently settle for the least bad option in every single electoral contest. You've seen those electoral contests strained over time. But then there was that period of time from 2009 to 2017 where there was that rupture. And then from that point on, 2017 to present, you've had massive nationwide anti-regime protests triggered by economic crises, political crisis, economic crisis, environmental crisis, social crisis, even religious matters. The hijab issue, for example, the Women Life Freedom Movement, 150 different cities, towns, and villages. So this is not at all the Tehran urban elite with jeans cooler than you and I, or jeans cooler than mine. I'm sure you have good jeans. The moral of the story is I am okay talking about this issue because I'm taking my cues from the street and seeing if those moral cues from the street could create something that would be a positive for US national security. Because I too got into this looking at the gross oversteps and the accidents and the hangovers and the murder and the mayhem that was Iraq and Afghanistan. That's the last thing I think as an American, but also as an Iranian American, that I think should be brought in. So with all of that, I think you do have a positive case for this marriage that I've been talking about, the maximum pressure with the maximum support. Why maximum pressure? Okay, one reason, going back to the, I mentioned that the Iranians were trying to kill Trump. There's three reasons. I'll get over the other two if you want in a future Q&A. But the third reason is Trump broke the taboo that used to exist in Washington. It was mainstream, center-left, center-right conventional wisdom that if even political rhetorical support was given to Iranian protesters, then that would be the kiss of death. It would delegitimize them. What we actually saw was that there was a foreign government, the United States of America, imposing massive economic costs, what Trump called the maximum pressure campaign from 2017, 2018, all the way up to the end of his administration. And Dave, I can't point to you to a single anti-American slogan. I can't point to you to a single anti-Trump slogan from the Iranian population from 2017 to present. Not only that, Trump's comments in Twitter doing what I recommended, which is to start to give some life to the street, start to give some life to the population. I think in late 2019 or early 2020, based on that next round of boom and bust protests, Trump's tweet in Persian or whatever, in X, I think it was Twitter then, not X, was the most seen tweet in Persian Twitter history. This stuff is not coming in a vacuum. It's coming due to the long contest of the street and the state. So one reason I'm saying no limited arms control is because that puts time on the side of the state. It puts resources on the side of the state. We should be in the business, I think, of contracting the resources available to the state. No own goals. We can have a debate about how forward-leaning we can be, how forward-leaning we should be, what the U.S. needs to do in terms of the proper constellation of military bases, what's too forward-leaning, what's not that. But I think this push away from the table, this maximum pressure, and then you couple it with maximum support. A Starlink unit is a lot cheaper than an F-35. In the 2019 protests, there was like at least 1,500, based on Reuters reporting, at least 1,500 people killed in the 6 days under the cover of darkness. I think it's critical to have those protesting Iranians be able to get their voice out, to be able to communicate with each other. This stuff will take time, absolutely. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying this is a 1, 2, 3 thing, but I do think this is an option worth exploring, especially if the sides of the debate for so long are a bad deal or a bad war. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying give this theory a chance.
So you're saying basically like keep the maximum pressure on sanctions and everything, just kind of keep the situation where it is, ramp up the sanctions, and then try to support the protesters on the ground. That's your strategy here.
Yeah, the two operative, in my personal view, ask me personally, yes, the two operative verbs that you mentioned, ramp up. So yes, it's not just the sanctions are static, the sanctions have to go this way, and then support the protesters. I think, unfortunately, we only have 100 days of Trump term 2. It is a far cry from, even in terms of the rhetoric Trump espoused in term 1 when it came to supporting the Iranian people. I think one recent missed opportunity, for example, for this marriage, this rhetoric with this very impressive economic reality, was the Nowruz address. The president gave a very short, the White House press website just had like a very short 1 or 2 paragraphs, whereas I think President Obama used the bully pulpit with video much more effectively to deliver a political message. I think it was a mistake then. He was delivering a political message to the regime. The President Trump, can actually deliver a political message to the Iranian population.
Yeah, but I mean, this gets to my point that I really think if you're trying to support the protesters, give them material support, like you seem to be suggesting with the Starlinks, then that gives the regime the ability to crack down and say foreign interference. And, you said that from 2017 to 2020, no Iranians said anything bad about Trump. I mean, I've heard from plenty of Iranians talking about the dire economic situation because of the maximum pressure. I don't think we should be pursuing a policy that includes tightening the economic noose on the Iranian people because you think the government should change. I think that's just an interventionist policy that's just completely misguided.
Okay.
Do I respond to that, or do I?
Yes, quick response, and then I'll go in with my question.
Oh, so I'll try to keep it quick. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
With respect to, I think I'll skip the Starlink. There is a good parallel for Starlink, which is the history of satellites in Iran. That wasn't foreign intervention. That was domestic demand. People wanted access to satellite stations. That was not the Iranian government's own satellite. The supply was so cheap and demand was so high. We've gotten to the point inside Iran, if you look, where the government confiscates satellites and sells back satellites. So let's turn the regime's crazy kleptocratic behavior against itself and at least allow the dividend of being able to have the Iranian people communicate with one another. So I think these are low-cost things that if the US actually devotes time for, rather than weird projects that other developmental organizations or other elements of the US intelligence community devote time for, that I think would really throw us far off the mark with respect to what is and isn't in the national interest. And let me just say, with respect to those protests, it's not me that's putting it there. I have actually spent time closely monitoring protest slogans. There's no doubt that when you squeeze the economy—
I don't mean protests. I'm not talking about I mean just Iranian people in general.
Yeah, I'm talking about Iranian people. They haven't gotten a single chance to voice what they want. So you have to look at protests because it's not a democratic government. That's why we use the word regime. Regime is pejorative.
So we should just never trust anything like an Iranian says to the media?
No, I'm an Iranian. Why would I say that?
I mean, inside Iran.
No, why would I say that? I have friends who are inside Iran.
That's what you seem
why
to
would
be
I say that?
suggesting, because I'm saying that I've heard— Okay, I'm just saying I've heard from Iranians
government of the Islamic
saying that
Republic of
the
Iran
economic sanctions are hurting them, regular, ordinary Iranians. And this is what UN experts have said.
I'm telling you the massive wave of protests that we have seen from 2017 to present, which is 2017 to 2018, one round.
Yeah, no, I get your point. I know your point. I'm saying that Iranians are hurting because of this policy, and I think that's a good reason not to do it.
It's quite cute that you think Iranians are hurting because you're not looking to actually develop a policy that empowers— I think you think it's quite cute that Iranians are hurting.
Let me jump in real quick.
I think it's cute.
You're infantilizing.
I'm again. All right.
You're infantilizing with respect. You're infantilizing and instrumentalizing, and you're ignoring everything.
Infantilizing them because I don't want my government to use their economic power to hurt their economy.
Moderator's prerogative and take over this discussion so it doesn't escape us and keep it productive. So Behnam, to Dave's point, renowned researchers or known academics in this country, like Narges Bajorli and Ali Nasser, for example, wrote for Johns Hopkins a PhD dissertation that turned into a book on that describes the sanctions, how sanctions work specifically in Iran. And those are Iranians, Iranian Americans that do speak to the adverse effects that the maximum pressure campaign has taken on the Iranian people inside Iran. And that I see as a negative consequence of this maximum pressure. That in the book, they make this the thesis or the argument that it is driving a lot of Iranians towards the state because the centralized state is the only one that is offering them subsidies and offering them any respite from the economic pressures imposed by the United States. I think that is also partially what Dave is trying to propose as an argument here. Can you respond to it? And then after that, Dave, you can comment, and then I have a question for you, Dave.
Yes, thank you. Excellent question. I've actually read the book. I haven't read the dissertation. I've read the book. I've met both these individuals in Washington. We disagree on, the joke is the color of the sky because of our worldview and our willingness to explore other policy options and like that major 800-pound gorilla in the room that I was trying to get at, which is which folks in Washington are pro 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which folks in Washington are not pro 2015 Iran nuclear deal. And from everything else, that debate will flow. The heart, I think, Hekmat, of the question that you were offering is, or the proposition you were offering is that through those max pressure sanctions, it would drive the Iranians to bridge the chasm that otherwise I think we would all agree, because we can even see it from a distance, exists between the state and in society in Iran. I think the evidence actually drastically does not support that conclusion. The reason I'm saying that is because when you have the rise in those anti-regime protests, again, once the sentiment or the zeitgeist moves from pro-reform towards trying to seek the street as a pathway to overthrow the state, once you get that shift, not only do you not get that shift to move back at the height of maximum pressure, but you can correlate that with diminishing voter turnout. So the measures that we would have that allow you to actually see, for example, that Iranians are bridging the gap between state and society, or that the regime is embracing the narrative, I simply don't see that. You don't see that in the protest chants. You don't see that in the dispositions of Iranians on social media. I think with immense respect, that is a political argument. And I have measures to prove my point. I'm sure they have measures to prove their point. But I don't see any evidence that actually this drove Iranians to embrace the state, particularly because when you look at the evolving pattern, you don't even have to take it from someone like me. You could take it from someone who is an international lawyer who probably disagrees with me also on the color of the sky, but had a great piece in, I think, January 2018 in Politico. Gisu Nia, she's a kick-ass human rights person. Again, we disagree on big picture, Trump, max pressure stuff. But when that person, that international lawyer, was talking about the changing pattern of protest in Iran, she mentioned that it actually came from the urban and rural poor, the people who actually the regime could buy off with those subsidies, but ultimately couldn't. And when you look at that pattern of protest, unlike, like I said, 1999 and 2009, which was capital out, urban elite, this was rural poor. It was outside in. So I think for all those reasons, I disagree with the main part of the thesis, which is that this would drive Iranians towards the state.
Okay. Thank you, Behnam. Dave, if you'd like to comment, or I can go to my question.
Yeah, you could go ahead.
All right. So, Dave, the question I want to pose to you is that Behnam made a good point here. Iran is the weakest it's ever been. It did lose its proxy in Syria and Damascus. It did lose a lot of its the weight that Hezbollah used to pose in the region. The Houthis, it seems like any other month now, they're going to be wiped off by U.S. armaments. So it is the weakest it's ever been. It is economically suffering. Now with these negotiations, something that Behnam usually points to is that Riyal is now resurging. It's appreciating to the dollar because of the prospect of these negotiations. So why should we not use the leverage, the leverage that we have right now in this very weakened position that Iran is in, to put the maximum pressure to make sure that they don't even have a civilian nuclear program, to make sure that they don't even have that as an option, or else we offer the other options of regime change?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's just not in the U.S. interest. I think if anything, this shows that Iran is not this big threat that a lot of people try to portray them as a threat to the United States. One thing I would disagree with in your question is that the Houthis, I mean, they survived under 7 years of a brutal war, and they keep downing U.S. drones, and they almost just hit an aircraft carrier the other day. It looks like, it was very foolish to think that the U.S. could bomb that problem away. So that's one group that still remains a very serious problem for Israel in the region as it's doing what it's doing in Gaza. But I mean, I think all these things like the Iranian currency doing well, I think these are good things. I think the U.S. and Iran should engage in trade. I don't think we should try to knock them down if they're on their back foot. I think it could just be have disastrous results. And this idea, I mean, we just hear this all the time, about these different countries, like just a little more sanctions, more pressure, and then we end up with countries like Cuba, like North Korea, under these economic sanctions for so long. And again, the government, they can thrive in these conditions, especially when it comes to Iran now and this over reliance on sanctions. One thing that happened under Biden, I mean, for the most part, he kept sanctions on Iran. He added sanctions to Iran. Iran found markets in Asia, Chinese companies that aren't afraid of U.S. sanctions. And this is a consequence of the over-sanctioning. We're creating kind of this alternative economic system where Iran and China and Russia can really increase economic ties. And as I think time goes on with the current regime in power, if we continue the maximum pressure, they could adapt that the economic relief wouldn't even really matter so much. I mean, I think that would take like very, very long time, but where they would be willing to make concessions on their nuclear program for the U.S. But right now, I just think the U.S. and all the issues that we have going on at home, our spending and everything that's been happening, it's just not in our interest to try to change the government in Iran at all. And we can simply just have a good try to work on relations with them. And again, that would just take away a lot of the juice of the Islamic Revolution, if we did that.
Behnam, would you like to comment on the same question?
I'd like to comment if there's time, but not
Yes.
on the question, but just on something Dave mentioned about the economic interdependence being an option.
Go ahead. But please keep it brief because we have a lot of questions. Actually.
Okay, sorry. But do cut me off if I go long. I apologize.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay. The reason I wanted to comment on the economic theory is, after the JCPOA was agreed to in the summer of 2015, it was Iran's supreme leader himself who I think just a few months after came out to backstop the agreement by saying, this doesn't mean trade with America. He was trying to tamp that proposition down. What I fear is actually happening here is that Iran's negotiating team is trying to play up President Trump's deal-making instruments and, with immense respect, try to rope-a-dope the president of the United States of America. That's not something we should be applauding. That's not something we should be happy about. The Islamic Republic is not looking to get American investment in. Foreign Minister Araghchi's comment in the Washington Post, some of you may have seen, I think it was last week or the week before, Iran's foreign minister had an op-ed in the Washington Post basically saying it was $1 trillion+ economy. Yes, Iran itself, the state, is one of the last great untapped markets of the world. But that is really the predation of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps by design. These are the companies that have mushroomed. They left the battlefield in 1988, 1989, and then entered politics and then entered the economy. It's a classic authoritarian story here. It's very unfortunate. When you go back in the US-Iran history, America was the country that warned Iran about neighboring Iraq, getting ready, Saddam Hussein's Iraq at that time in 1979, 1980, getting ready to invade Iran. The government, because of that ideological shield, wasn't willing to listen. And now, because of that ideological shield, still shuns America, still shuns this kind of investment, still shuns this kind of interdependence. You don't have to take it from me. You don't have to take it from Dave. Just do a thought experiment. Tehran's major international airport is called Imam Khomeini Airport. The guy who was saying death to America, the guy who was even saying death to Jimmy Carter. Okay. Imagine Donald Trump landing with the Trump plane or with Air Force One landing at Imam Khomeini Airport. Do you think Ayatollah Khamenei, the second supreme leader of the Islamic Republic, the one who's been in charge since 1989, the longest serving autocrat in the modern Middle East, is going to come out there to greet him? That Islamic Revolution would be over. These guys
Okay.
actually believe what they say. We do these autocrats around the world, whether it's Putin or Khamenei or whoever, a disservice by saying they don't mean what they say.
Okay, thank you, Behnam. Let's start with the questions because we have a long queue. Thank you to everyone who's watching. We have 4,200 watching right now, and we have a lot of questions flooding in. So let's start with this one. It's about the use of supplicant, the word supplicant, to describe the Iranian regime. The questioner asks in their own way, how could they be seen as a supplicant if right now they have excellent relations with China and Russia that could support them and see them through this economic pressure campaign and see them through to come out on the other end with a nuclear program?
Well, it is to actually look at how they are doing relative to their previous position that makes them look like a supplicant. You know, the qualm we have with the bilateral US-Iran negotiations, when you look at today, when you look at the past, because the regime was under sanctions each time it engaged, 2012, 2013 to 2015, and then 2025 ongoing. It enters with a weak hand. It enters because the economy is weak. That's why we say the supplicant. It is seeking something, right? In 2012, 2013 to 2015, it was seeking sanctions relief. Now it's allegedly seeking sanctions relief. That's at least what they say. I have a couple other theories as to why the regime is engaging in 2025 when it did not engage at all throughout all of Trump's first term. There's a good debate there. I think it's more political than economic. But supplicant because they say they want something. They seek something. And they aren't necessarily in the position to get it because the person, for lack of a better word, with all the cards is the other side. But the reason I use this word to kind of hype the situation, to ring the alarm bell, is precisely because if you look at history, even when they enter with a weak hand, they've left with a strong hand. So it's something that actually goes on the negotiations that allows the weaker party to jujitsu the stronger party and get us, the liberal democratic West, but particularly here in the United States of America, so invested in a process, so invested in the concept of a deal that any deal becomes the end goal, not a deal that has a ZOPA or a zone of possible agreement.
Okay, Dave, would you like to comment on the same question?
No, I think that's a good point. You know, about, like I mentioned, the potential for China and Russia really to help Iran.
Okay. So another question here from Jude Russo via Civil. Why is a civilian nuclear program in Iran verboten, but we are actively sponsoring a civilian nuclear program in Saudi Arabia, the silent partner in 9/11 attacks on the United States? And if I can add a little point so we can engage in the topic at hand to both of you. Um, there was some disagreement between Steve Witkoff and Marco Rubio to the pertaining to the degree of enrichment that would be allowed and whether it would only be the deal would only allow for enriched uranium to be imported into Iran or whether the centrifuges themselves in Iran would be allowed to operate to run a civilian nuclear program. Could you comment on that, both of you, and address Jude's question through via Civil? Thank you, Jude.
Absolutely, I have a view, but Dave, don't let me go monopolize the time. You go first, sir.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You know, we see this deal about the U.S. potentially helping the Saudis develop a civilian nuclear program. And of course, it has echoes of the U.S. helping Iran do the same thing at one time. And, you know, the Saudis, again, as I mentioned earlier, it is interesting. And I think this is something that's really on Trump's side to make a deal, is the fact that the Saudis, the Gulf Arab countries, seem to be on the side of diplomacy here. But the Saudis, I mean, they're a very despotic regime as well. And, you know, they committed all sorts of atrocities in their war in Yemen and all sorts of crackdowns on the domestic front against the Shia minority and things like that. And it really does go to show, you know, it doesn't matter exactly how a certain government behaves. It's really just which one is willing to go along with U.S. interests more so. And was there a second part to that? About the enrichment thing. And so I'm curious to know what Behnam wants here, because I thought that was interesting how it seemed like Rubio tried to twist what Witkoff said. Because what Witkoff said, it did sound like the Trump administration is all right with the 3.7% limit as same as the JCPOA. But then Rubio says, oh, no, he's talking about the uranium he can import, Iran can import. And Rubio also said something false. He said that there's no country in the world, other country in the world that has an enrichment program that's just a civilian nuclear program. But that's not true. I mean, as I understand it, Japan, Germany. I also believe Brazil and maybe the Netherlands. You probably have more knowledge about that with me, but yeah, do you think, would that be an acceptable case for you? And I mean, I shouldn't start asking all these questions, but I'm just curious, because the proposition is, if the U.S. achieves denuclearization, what if they do achieve de-enrichment? Do you think they should still pursue regime change, or is regime change really the goal here?
So just because I know I'm going to forget, I'm trying to write down as fast as possible. Hold that last point about the enrichment versus the nuclear program, because this is an absolutely excellent question. I think it gets to the heart of the matter here, because it's like, for thee, but not for me, right? One reason we can't hold Israel to certain standards here is because they're not signing the NPT. They're not part of the additional protocol. As far as, I mean, at least they're not signing the NPT. So in this sense, I'm at least going to hold the Islamic Republic to the rules of the inherited regime, because it was the Shah's regime that signed the NPT. So I'm gonna hold people to the things that they say they're going to do or not do with respect to nuclear energy in their country. That's macro point number one. Number two is that bad deals. Sorry, that's number three, bad deals. Number two is that, the Carl Schmitt quote, he who is sovereign is he who makes the exception. That has, I think, been a problem in U.S. foreign policy, the creation of so many exceptions because of bilateral relationships. So in my view, and this is a criticism of bipartisan during Cold War and after Cold War U.S. Foreign policy, but more so post-Cold War U.S. foreign policy, we have created a lot of exceptions to the non-proliferation regime that allow countries like Iran to be able to point to examples of double standards. For example, the 2005 India nuclear deal. For example, the 2021, I think it was, the AUKUS with Australia, the nuclear submarine deal. And one of the things I mentioned back in 2015, 2016 with respect to the JCPOA is that a bad deal is going to create a bad precedent. I'm worried about the status of South Korea's nuclear program because they don't have the gold standard. They have what's technically called the silver standard, where they don't forswear domestic enrichment permanently. It's not like the UAE, for example. The UAE still has a carve-out where if there's a different deal, perhaps they can negotiate a different agreement, but it's not going to be a 1, 2, 3 agreement. Similarly, but less so, Vietnam. Similarly, but less so, Japan, particularly if we're leaving not just the Middle East, but leaving all these theaters of competition. So bad deals create bad precedents. And it actually was during the height of Iran responding to max pressure, and then Iran later on, the nuclear escalation, that Crown Prince MBS in Saudi Arabia was saying, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, I'm going to get a nuclear weapon too. I think at least once or twice he said, I think the first time was in 2018. I think the second time was later. But naturally, yes, this is a point of major concern. And to me, that brings me back to at least trying to fight for zero enrichment in Iran. That was really the heart, the original sin of you could say, the old school hawkish criticism of the process that led to the JPOA, which was that secret channel between the Obama administration and the Iranians, funnily enough, in Oman in 2012, because that's when the US debate went from, can Iran have a nuclear program, to how much a nuclear program can Iran have, or more specifically, can Iran have domestic enrichment, to how much domestic enrichment can Iran have. I think with respect to the intentions of this regime, with respect to the nuclear obfuscation of this regime, the failed European and international diplomacy from 2002 to 2006 with this regime, the fact that these guys since April 2006 have not stopped enriching uranium for a single day, doesn't matter what grade, but have not stopped enriching uranium for a single day on their own soil, points to larger, more problematic aspirations. And if one is willing to junk everything I just said about bad nuclear precedents and the US defense of the NPT needing to be better, if you only see this thing through the lens of the region and you see needing to give Saudi Arabia some kind of domestic enrichment because of, I don't know, like an Abraham Accords 2.0, I think it would be great if Saudi Arabia and Israel normalize relations. I'm all for members that are the status quo members of the pro-US members of the status quo order in the Middle East getting together. But I don't think we need to sacrifice our non-proliferation standards for it. I don't think enrichment, domestic uranium enrichment in Saudi Arabia is either a cost-effective idea for them or an economic or a strategically useful thing for us. Therefore, I don't think we should grant it. And I think the worst of all worlds is to create a bad precedent with your adversary that would force your ally to say, hey, how come he can get it, but I can't get it?
Okay. Thank you, Behnam. Dave, do you have a comment? Do you want to follow up on this, or should we go
I
to
just
another
thought
question?
it was an interesting comment about, so because Iran is a signatory to the NPT, you're going to hold them to that standard, or Israel's not. So I guess you could just go along with ignoring their nuclear weapons program. I mean, and another thing with the JCPOA, I mean, I think the NPT is the ultimate thing. You know, the purpose of the JCPOA is basically trust building, build a relationship, and then we could go into the NPT, and Iran could be subject to those regular IAEA inspections under that, and we can have trust that they're not going to build a nuclear weapon based on that. And I think that's pretty good.
So just one word on trust building and then the international part. You know, don't take it from me. Iran's foreign minister back in 2017, the one
Behnam,
who,
sorry
yes,
to
yes, sorry.
interject, but as you comment on that and you respond, take that this question as well, because it's
Oh,
somewhat related. Stephen Murray asks via civil, what about Israel's nuclear sites in Dimona? They have never been inspected by the IAEA, similar to the point that Dave just made. If you can address both points, Behnam, please.
so I am absolutely agnostic about Israel's nuclear program, nuclear sites in Dimona, reprocessing nuclear reactors, how much of their grid. You can take that up with someone whose job is solely functional non-proliferation. I see non-proliferation through the Iran lens. I have the privilege of being senior director of the Iran program here. There are people who look at it this way. Again, that Avner Cohen book is actually a very fair, judicious history of how Israel actually procured its nuclear program, particularly against the backdrop of the Cold War. I would recommend that for folks. I am neither expert enough in their nuclear history to be able to comment beyond that, nor do I think from a U.S. national interest standpoint, do I have much of a qualm with it, given the way that most U.S. presidents pre and post-Cold War have much of a qualm with it, because they're not, in that sense, lying about it in the way that the Islamic Republic was lying about it. And then I was supposed to answer something at the end of Dave's question. This was just the Israel point. I missed that.
Dave, do you want to remind him
Yes,
of
sorry.
Now
I think the enrichment question. I think Behnam.
Oh,
The
if it's
question
about
was,
if it's about enrichment.
yes, yes.
Yeah, I think my question was, if you get Iran to stop enriching, is that enough? But would you still want to pursue regime change? You know, would you still say, okay, let's still do maximum pressure if they reach a deal, or are you just against the deal at all?
So I think there's two ways. There's what I want and there's what U.S. policy is versus realistic it could be. I think I'm not going to scoop the president. I'm not going to get in front of the president. I think the president has been remarkably clear he wants a deal. And if he's going to be pursuing a deal, I think this dismantlement framework is the best way to go about it. If Iran actually, under the dismantlement framework, forgoes domestic enrichment, there is an end point. There is a way in which you could actually bring back debates about civil nuclear energy. The way I think you can do that is, first of all, by not having any stockpile of enriched uranium, not having any fissile material on Iranian soil, having destroyed all the production capacity. So the centrifuges, the machines that actually spin the uranium, and you have, forgive me, you have the provision that actually governs something that is nuclear that is not governed by the JCPOA, which is the Bushehr light water reactor. It's a small light water reactor in Iran's southwest. It actually was created by the Iranians and the Germans late in the Shah's time. Saddam Hussein bombed it during the Iran-Iraq War. Ultimately, the Russians joined it bailed it out in the 1990s. It's an endless money pit. And from an economic perspective, doesn't make sense for the regime to be enriching uranium. I understand they don't trust the world. I understand they have this revolutionary ideology. But if we're taking this solely from the business perspective here, it's not worth it for them. Today, Iran's electric grid, depending on how charitable you want to be,
just because we're kind of short of time here, I'd like you to just answer this question.
Which is
if Iran agrees to not enrich uranium,
great.
Would you say
then the president should take that deal, but he should not take his foot off the gas when it comes to supporting the Iranian people, or not take his foot off the gas. Yeah, and not take his foot off the gas when it comes to going after Iranian terror networks or money laundering or cyber activity.
But you said sanctions should stay in place?
No, if you're doing a nuclear deal and it's only a nuclear deal, and you manage to get what we want, the dismantlement framework, into the nuclear deal, then yeah, you remove what is, I don't believe there is such a thing, but President Obama termed 4 pieces of legislation nuclear-only sanctions. Mm-hmm. We actually have a monograph about this. Came out March 7th at FDD, co-authored with Andrea Stricker, Ord Kichri. Go read it. I think the folks will really benefit from it.
But you still think that the overall goal should be regime change?
I think so
Even
long
if
as
there's
there's
a
an
deal.
Islamic Republic, there will be threats to U.S. national security interests. The most urgent one of them is, of course, the nuclear threat. So yes, you have to find a way to address that. I think the best way to address that is to nest it into the counter-regime problem. Now, hopefully through max pressure, you do get a
Okay, but I mean,
dismantlement
the
deal.
question,
You
I'm
should
just trying
take
to
it. You
get you
should,
to
yes, you should take it,
answer the
but you should
question.
not take your foot off the gas when countering the regime.
So
Okay.
regime change is still the goal.
Yeah, in the long run, yes. So long as the
Okay,
Islamic Republic
right.
behaves
Yeah,
like
that's
the
what I was
Islamic
trying to.
Republic for the past 46 years, you
Mhm.
still need to counter it. Otherwise, why let the adversary land body blows and you not respond?
Okay. So now that we clarified this point, another quick question here for Dave. Polar via civil. Given Iran's documented support for militant proxies across the Middle East, its repeated violations of international nuclear inspections, and recent shift towards alliances with Russia, China, wouldn't easing sanctions, reducing pressure, just empower Tehran's aggressive regional ambitions? To Dave, please.
No, I don't think so. I mean, when we talk about their support for proxies across the region, as I mentioned, with the Saudis and everything, the Sunni Arab states, I think there's a chance here for them, to have better relations. And I really think the key to everything right now, as I mentioned, is the situation in Gaza, this horrific daily slaughter that we see. Everybody talks about Iran supporting these proxies across the region. Well, the U.S., if not for U.S. military support, Israel would not be able to be doing what it's doing in Gaza, what it's doing in southern Lebanon, what it's doing in southern Syria, what it's doing in the West Bank. So the U.S. certainly doesn't have like the moral high ground over Iran when it comes to supporting armed groups in the region, when we've been funding this horrific war and all these airstrikes in Yemen now. And the Saudis, going back to supporting the Saudi war in Yemen, and helping, Ahmad al-Shara, the former leader of al-Qaeda in Syria, take over the country, with the sanctions campaign and the U.S. occupation of eastern Syria and everything. So I think a lot of Iran's activities are a response to that and Israeli aggression in the region. And I think diplomacy is the better alternative for the U.S. and would give Iran the incentive not to be aggressive in the region.
Ben, would you like to comment on the same question?
No real main comment there. Just I would say even post-diplomacy, like in the JCPOA period, we didn't see Iran take its foot off the gas. The proxy threat, 2015 to 2017, that's when things really heated up with respect to Syria, for example. So
we were also on the same side with them against ISIS at the same time.
The U.S. did, you're right, the U.S. did provide air cover to Iran-backed Shia militias multiple times in Iraq. I think there's a whole debate there to be had about tactical relationships, but I don't think that we should give the Iranians the credit for winning the fight against ISIS. I think that's mostly what the Americans and then secondarily the Kurdish Peshmerga did.
Okay. Behnam, one last question here. It's about, again, the idea of regime change. If we are unable to get full denuclearization, what examples of a successful regime change would you refer to in the last, what examples of successful regime change would you refer that didn't require US military intervention from Julian Nader via civil?
It's an excellent question. He's right to, Julian, you said?
Julia or Julian? Sorry. Yeah, Julian.
Yes, he is right to point out there's not that many cases. The best one that actually merges a regime change scenario, no shooting, and in fact a looming nuclear program, with that one actually had weapons, was South Africa. That's the best one, where you get to check the box on all three. There are examples in history of more friendly countries, Taiwan back in the day, foregoing this pathway. There is some not so great examples that are very popular in our discourse today, like what Prime Minister Netanyahu has mentioned with respect to the Libya model, for example. There's Ukraine, which for a while was a good model. But I would say this, the US government should not be in the business of keeping the Islamic Republic of Iran around. That's something you can let the revolutionary leaders and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the clerics in Tehran worry about. That should not be the prerogative of the US. So with respect to Mr. Julian's question, the South Africa model is a good model.
Dave, could you just comment on that briefly, and then we have to conclude the Q&A segment so we can go into the closing statements. Please go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, just one thing to kind of piggyback off what you said about Israel, Netanyahu, and Libya. he keeps going on about this Libya model, which obviously that has implications with what happened to Gaddafi. And it gets into kind of the reality of the situation that if there's not some kind of deal here, if there's not diplomacy between the U.S. and Iran, if the U.S. doesn't ease the pressure and just keeps backing Israel the way it is, then war seems inevitable. I mean, Israel is very eager to bomb Iran. With obviously they want the U.S. to help as well. And so, just to ask you one last question, like, you say you're against war with Iran, but yet you want regime change with all measures necessary. At what point would you say, okay, the U.S. and Israel should actually attack Iran? Because it does seem like that is going to be the inevitable result of this maximum pressure campaign.
Well, one hopes it's not the result, but hope is not a policy. Second, of course, I do not believe war is a tool of regime change, or war should be a tool of regime change. That certainly, in my view, would impede what you want on the back end of regime change, which is a better regime. And the Middle East is full with examples, as you mentioned, of things getting worse, not better, over time, particularly when there is a militarized regime change. No doubt, however, the Islamic Republic has its foot on the gas. I mean, the Iranians last February 2023, I think it was, briefly, they said it was an accident, but they were caught by the IAEA, briefly were at 83% purity. The US bomb that we dropped 2 bombs against Japan in World War II, 1 plutonium, 1 uranium. The uranium bomb we dropped was enriched anywhere from 79 to 80% purity. So in terms of treating 90% like weapons grade pure, 100% only, the cat's already out of the bag when it comes to trying to take measures to stop this country's nuclear program. So when I talk about the use of force, it's in response. It's like in self-defense, for example. Israel, April, October of last year is a good example, doing military strikes against the Islamic Republic. But more broadly, the point is to not have to do this. It's to put the regime in Tehran to the choice. You bring in the military assets into the region in such a way that these guys are overmatched, that they know that if they escalate, they are overmatched. If they absorb, they will have to absorb even more. Rather than have us be put to the choice here in America, let's have that country be put to the choice, constrain the resources. Yeah.
Thank you both. We have to cut it off here and go into the closing statements. If you can, Behnam, you're closing first. You have 5 minutes. If you can address the last couple of questions that we have here in your closing statements, you and
Sure.
Dave, both of you. We have one more question about DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, stating that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, if you can address that. And one question about perceived hypocrisy of US organizing the coup in 1953 with Mossadegh. So Behnam, please take it away. You have 5 minutes.
With your gentleman's permission, these are 2 very good loaded questions. I'll turn to them rather than read a rehash of my theory, which is that the US should do this. If you're going to pursue diplomacy, denuclearization is not the proper term. The proper term is dismantlement or disarmament. That should be the goal of diplomacy. But more broadly, so long as they're an Islamic Republic that acts like the Islamic Republic has over the past 46 years, Washington should be actually working with the currents in Iran rather than empowering the state to crush the street. That's at the heart of my argument before, during, and after nuclear diplomacy. Is at the heart of my argument today. 2 really excellent questions brought forth by Hekmat. One is the Mossadegh example, and I'm a rather historically minded individual, and I will absolutely keep this limited to the 5 minutes, but it's worth noting, yes, indeed, the US and the Brits did have what was called Operation Ajax, but the 2 orders that the late Shah had actually signed, they were called farmans, the commands, were actually legal orders. So the question of who did a coup against whom is a debate really for historians to continue to address. But second, I find it very rich that in the debate around the Islamic Republic, we're talking about the Mossadegh coup or the Mossadegh incident, however you want to call it, because the clergy, meaning the cast of characters, the element of society, the clerical class, which has come to power after the 1979 revolution, was actually essential in working with foreign agents, taking foreign money, particularly American money, because they believe Mossadegh had gone too far to the left. You can see this with the way the Islamic Republic lionizes Ayatollah Khashoggi and really even downplays in their own textbooks, in their own literature, in their own films, in their own documentaries, in their own writings, the achievements of Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh when it came to oil nationalization. So this is a very interesting bait and switch. And even in Iranian political discourse, it really grew in the 21st century, when they realized certain segments of the American left, the political class, and certainly large swaths of academia had been hyper-focusing on 1953. And then from then on, it became a smaller and then less so greater prop among Iran's English-speaking diplomats and even the supreme leader of Iran himself, when they realized that this was something that the West was willing to use as an impediment against itself. I did not catch all of the comment about DNI Gabbard, but I think it was about building a nuclear weapon. A nuclear weapon is composed of three things. Since the famous 2000 is composed of three things: the fissile material, the weaponization, so basically the fusing of the fissile material with the explosive material, usually within the contours of a warhead, not exclusively, and then the delivery vehicle, which in the case of Iran, we all assume would be a ballistic missile. Iran has multiple medium-range ballistic missiles that are capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. Iran has entire classes of systems that are ballistic missiles that exceed the missile technology control regime as defined as being nuclear capable. In respect to the fissile material, Dave even mentioned the timeline, about 20%, which is considered highly enriched, 60%. Lest we forget, uranium enrichment is not linear, it's logarithmic. So when you're at 20%, you've done much more of the lion's share of the work. When you're at 60%, you've gone more than 90% of the way to actual weapons grade. So they are quite literally a hair trigger away from that. Iran today, with that mass amount of uranium it has enriched on its own soil, generates between, most charitably, 1 to 2% of its electric grid through nuclear power. So they've just amassed all of this, starting all the way back from the Iran-Iraq War, a war that they've called the Holy Defense, a war that they've called the Sacred Defense, just for a science fair project or just for a security guarantee from a country that they have called the Great Satan and put blood and treasure towards for the past 46 years? I don't think so, and I don't think American policy thinks so. Thank you so much for your time and attention this evening.
Thank you very much, Behnam. At this point, Dave, please take it away. You have 5 minutes for your closing remarks.
So, as I said in my opening, I think a really important point here when we talk about these enrichment levels is that Iran has increased all of these levels and this stockpile of uranium in response to, after the U.S. pulled out of the JCPOA and in response to Israeli sabotage attacks while it was under this maximum pressure campaign. And so I know my opponent today is saying that he's against war with Iran or military action. But I believe that if we continue on this path of just of a hostile policy against the Iranian government, which is what he favors, this will inevitably lead to either war or it will just continue to crush the economy of Iran. And coupled with our policy of this unlimited support for Israel, unconditional, no matter what atrocities they commit or what countries they invade, what neighbors they bomb, these two things together are very dangerous, and war, I believe, would be inevitable. And when it comes to supporting protesters and sanctions, at the end of the day, this is just not our business. The U.S. would benefit from a less interventionist foreign policy. We would have less foreign countries, say death to America and things like that. Americans have their own troubles here, the economic situation, whatever your domestic situation is. We have our own things to worry about, and our history in the region over the past few decades is reason enough just not to pursue this. We need a completely different way that we approach the Middle East and Iran, and I believe that way is through diplomacy, lifting sanctions, and extricating ourselves from wars in the region, whether that's our own wars, like in Yemen. We still have troops in Iraq and Syria. We're bombing, launching airstrikes in Somalia, get ourselves out of those wars, and also get ourselves out of Israel's wars and stop giving them this unconditional support to do whatever they want, because that is the root, really, of all the conflicts in the region at the moment. So a diplomacy, easing sanctions, and just a different approach is what the U.S. needs to do. Or if we continue down these two paths, war is inevitable, and many people, innocent people, will lose their lives.
All right. Thank you, folks, for this excellent and engaging debate. At this point, I'm going to put out the, sorry, that is the wrong cue. Yes, this is the right one. The post-debate, please ignore this typo. This is the post-debate vote for the concluding thoughts that were just made. Take them into consideration. And once again, we ask everyone who's watching, we have 6,200 people online. Thank you all for tuning in on civil.com, on X, on Twitter, and on YouTube. Take a screenshot of this QR code if you're watching on your phone, and then go to the app on your phone and click on the QR code. Or if you're watching on your computer or TV, just with your phone, you can scan this QR code and you can give us your post-debate response to this, to the arguments that you heard today. Please do so now if you can. As we do so, as you scan this QR code and you go through, I wanted to thank both debaters, Dave and Behnam. You did an excellent job in really diving into the weeds of such a complicated and pertinent issue in American politics today. And yes, it was a little fraught at points, but I think you both did an excellent job in keeping it civil, which is what we like to do with these debate series that we've started in the past year. So in the future, we have debates coming up every other month. So every other month, we do a debate virtually, like the one you're watching now. And every other month, we do a debate in New York City, in Midtown Manhattan. Our last debate, if you'd like to watch it on civil.com, it was about the war in Ukraine and the Trump approach to the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. We had journalist Eli Lake from the Free Press and journalist Aaron Mate from the Gray Zone debate. And we ended up having a fully standing room only venue for that debate. So we're excited to bring other more pressing topics in the future. All right, let's see how we're doing on the votes. We seem to have a lot of them. Excellent, excellent. I will stall a little bit longer to give people one last chance to vote if they haven't done so. As I do that, please, I invite everyone to check out civil.com. Civil.com is a site we're hosting this debate on. If you're watching on Civil, you already know how awesome of a platform it is. They have excellent content that hopes to engage Americans in topics that are not necessarily discussed, and to do so in a civil and engaging manner. So I really recommend it. It's a free service. It's a free streaming platform and has a wealth of options for entertaining debates and content that I highly recommend. All right, with this, the stalling comes to an end and we go to the final results. All right, thank you for holding with us, folks. Here we go. So for the pre-debate vote, we had 7 who agreed, 18 who disagreed, and 15 who were undecided on the motion, which states, if the Trump administration fails to achieve complete Iranian denuclearization, the United States government should pursue all necessary measures to effect regime change in Iran. For the post-debate votes, we have 6 who agree, 15 who disagree, and 6 who are undecided. So we have a change towards the disagree that is about 11%, which means that the opposition wins this debate, which I believe is Dave. Congratulations, Dave, on a debate well earned and on a debate win well earned. And congratulations, Behnam, on a debate well fought. Thank you very much, both of you. Again, you have exemplified the type of debates that we like to have here. And thank you all once more for everyone who tuned in today. This was an excellent debate, and we hope to bring many more for you in the future.